Welcome into another edition of the Gamecock Central Radio Podcast. I'm Wes Mitchell, alongside Chris Clark. Obviously, plenty going on. South Carolina Media Day on Sunday, first practice on Monday. Gamecocks also pick up a commitment from a Georgia safety, Jonathan Gipson, on Monday as well. So, Chris, all types of stuff to talk about and all types of stuff going on GamecockCentral.com. I kind of woke up this morning and it just felt like the season is upon us, and hard to like really comprehend that it's here again. It seems like this offseason just flew by.
It did, yeah. It seems like football is always ongoing because, for fans, you get spring practice and then you get preseason camp that leads into the season. But, unfortunately for the fans, I say unfortunately because a lot of them would like to be around football as much as possible. They get spring ball, and then that's pretty much it until the team lines up. There's one open practice. At least for us in the media, we can be around a little bit more, go hang around the indoor facility for camp, go around to some high school practices, things like that. So we sort of get to jump in a little bit earlier and then get to see a few more, a little bit more practice time than the fans do. So we're I guess, fortunate in that regard, but it does always turn around quickly every single year, and the first game's going to be here before we know it.
Yeah, absolutely, and like I said, first practice on Monday morning. I thought, man, just I know people want to hear and read observations and stuff like that. I thought, first of all, I mean, we get 15 minutes, guys, so,
Right.
we can overanalyze it all we want, but 15 minutes with no 11 on 11, so you're not going to get a whole lot from that, and I don't think we're going to get a whole lot from camp anyway, but I guess I thought from what we did see, sort of your typical first practice, just in our portions, but was there anything, Chris, that sort of just caught your eye above all else, or just a particular guy or particular, just anything that when you walked out there this morning that just grabbed your attention?
Well, I think, Wes, that, Coach Muschamp said something interesting in his initial, his preseason press conference on Sunday, and that was that, look, he said, I've scripted out basically the first 11 practices, and I may be wrong on this. My guess is that he's very much aware of, what parts the media do see, during those first 15 minutes. And so I would say there's going to be days where we see 11 on 11. Today we didn't, and maybe there was a reason for that, just because, everybody's out there. They stretched in the indoor, then they went out first day and sort of were just getting acclimated. I mean, obviously they're just in helmets and shorts anyway, and so there's not a great deal that's going on. So for me, day one, it's just all about, looking at the newcomers, looking at the guys who have been on campus for a while, maybe seeing, okay, are there any body composition changes? Are there any position changes? Things like that. And so one of the things that stood out to me is just they are going to have some new guys plugged in there, and I'm always curious to get a look at them. Where are they fitting in? How do they look physically? How do some of the guys that return, some of the veteran players look? And so, Javon Kinlaw, is a huge guy. Brad Johnson and Aaron Sterling, a couple good-looking kids. Jemias Williams, we figured he was going to play nickel or corner, but could play safety. So where was he at? Well, he was at nickel the first day. Getting a look at sort of what the depth chart looks like. Finding out that, Shameik Blackshear looks really good, but he's also still third team at defensive end. Just looking at some of those things and sort of making mental notes about where they are and then what could change. But I'm always interested just to see what guys look like and where they sort of fit in on day one, and then how they progress from there is something we can track throughout the rest of preseason.
Yeah, and we were asked there on the Insider Forum about Shameik Blackshear, and was that a surprise that he was, third team? And I would say no. I think, first of all, the depth charts are all based on, who's in front of you, for one thing. So if you're at a position where, not that Dante Sawyer and Keir Thomas have had huge productive careers to this point, but I think most of us thought they were going to be ahead of those guys. Keir Thomas sounds like he's had a pretty good summer from everything we've heard. has sort of trimmed into a defensive end as opposed to being that guy that's kind of in between the two spots, defensive end and defensive tackle. And I think Blackshear, it can be both things. And what I mean by that is, you say, well, Shameik Blackshear's had a good summer. And there's a sense of sometimes people will take that and run with it as, well, this kid's ready to be a star. And I think, he's had a good summer. And, him being ready to be, just a starter all of a sudden, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. He can have a great summer and still not quite be ready. So I think both those things are true in that he has worked harder than he was before. He's taken a step in his life. He's taken a step in the weight room. Now the question is, can he translate that on a day-to-day basis? And I think that's one thing you hear Muschamp talk about. You hear his defensive coaches talk about, because it filters down from the top, is consistency. When a guy is not climbing the depth chart, it almost always seems like this coaching staff says something about day-to-day consistency. Mm-hmm. That's what they're looking for. Not one practice, not 3 practices, every practice, every day. So I think that's something where there's still upside there, but Shameik's going to have to put it all together if he's going to sort of step in and live up to some of these expectations that, that some folks put on him. So you have that, and I think that with that defensive line, there's so many different ways that it could play out. Ideally you want those senior guys, Dante Sawyer, Taylor Stallworth, Yorick Jones, you want those guys to sort of be able to carry the mantle and have big final years. But I think along the way, at every single spot on that line, there are scenarios where the young guys, or the newcomers, Javon Kinlaw, not necessarily, a young guy, JUCO transfer, true sophomore. There's scenarios at all of those spots, Chris, where I think somebody's going to be pushing for that spot. So we don't really have a feel yet, I don't think, for how the D-line is going to play out. All we know right now is that they're going to need guys to step up at that position.
Yeah, for sure. And, Will Muschamp's pointed out a couple things about the D-line, and, a lot of people are tracing it back to SEC Media Days that came up in the press conference on Sunday, and that he said, look, we need Taylor and Yorick and Dante to play their best football. They've got to play well this year for us to be successful, and that's true. I mean, that's guys, like you pointed out, Wes, going into their final season, but it's also true that they need some of those newcomers to step up, and it's something else Muschamp's pointed out, and he said, look, it's sort of scary when you're going into a season where you're going to be relying on guys who are not on campus yet. And of course, he was saying this in the summer and the spring when the guys weren't on campus. So they've been on campus a while. A lot of them have had a chance to go through the off-season program to varying degrees, but they still haven't played a snap of meaningful football. And even when you look at a guy like Shameik, he played 2 years ago. He played sparingly here and there, but last season he didn't play at all. And, was recovering, obviously, from his injuries from the off-season incident, had a lot of weight to put back on, had a lot of strength to gain. So he's made a lot of strides there, and as you pointed out, everything we've heard indicates he's done a nice job off the field, because even his spring probably still wasn't what it needed to be. And so he sort of turned it on in the summer. But, you look at the guys ahead of him, it's not like Carolina has superstars right now, but you got to remember one of them, Sawyer, who's a senior. You got to consider the fact that the other sort of in position is that buck spot, which Blackshear doesn't play. So it's not like you have two completely interchangeable defensive ends in the defense. So, look, if Blackshear does enough in the preseason to warrant him playing, if he shows that he is good enough to play, he'll play, because they're going to need guys, especially guys to go out and rush the passer, and those are the types of guys you want to rotate because they get gassed faster. So there'll be a spot for them, and then they're going to need Kinlaw. You're going to need Kobe Smith, who did some good things as a true freshman. Aaron Thompson, if he could come on as a red shirt, that'd be good. And Brad Johnson and Aaron Sterling, Brad being a buck and Aaron Sterling being more of a true end. That's going to be a couple guys from that freshman class that I think they are going to be relying on to play some type of role possibly this season. Now, if the other guys step up and carry the load, and they could redshirt Brad and Aaron, that would be fine too. I sort of would be surprised as things stand if that happened, whether they can use them on special teams or give them some snaps. But it's something they can just assess as time goes on. But they got to do it with some veterans and some youngsters both.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to have to be a mix. I thought, for one, I wanted to get a look at these receivers, because that's something I think seems to be sort of and we obviously didn't get a big look at them this time. Hopefully we will later in the week. That seems to be one of those things that's been sort of consistent throughout the summer, is that you hear, Shi Smith's speed. Obviously, we already saw, what Ortre Smith looked like in the spring. Then, Chad Terrell is a guy that clearly has started to build a little buzz within the program as well, even though he's kind of always a little bit, I think, overshadowed within the fan base, because the other two guys are major in-state prospects out of high school. But, I think you look at this receiver class, and the consensus seems to be that it's going to be a positive, sort of a hit at all three spots, and that all those guys could maybe help this year. And I think if you're South Carolina, even with the injuries to Randricus Davis, which I think is another story, that makes South Carolina feel pretty comfortable moving Corey Banks over to defensive back and giving him a shot there. I think that was a move that we sort of talked about there on the board a while in the past, and I think is something that probably is best case scenario for Corey Banks, and as far as having a shot to actually get on the field, because I think you look at the returners at wide receiver, and you look at the guys coming in at wide receiver that just got there, and the fact, think about how much two tight ends they played last year as far as their formations go. Hayden Hurst is going to be on the field. Casey Crosby is going to be on the field. When they're trying to go to more of a blocking type formation, I think Kyle Markway has a place out there. Jacob August played a lot last year. And then you have sort of the two guys that nobody outside the program knows much about, but I think are super talented, in Kill Pollard and Evan Henson. We could see more two tight end this year as well. So I think with the case of Corey Banks, it just makes sense in a lot of ways to give him that shot in the secondary.
It does, and it's an interesting situation, because you look at South Carolina's receiver core, and you see a lot of potential for, you sort of look at it and go, gosh, beyond the starters, how are the reps going to shake out? But it sort of worked itself out, because, well, Dreek Davis, from everything that we gathered on Media Day on Sunday, he's still a ways away, and you really feel for him. He's had multiple surgeries, and it's just about getting him healthy enough, and there's really not a timeline on it. It could be, I don't have a great feel for it, but he even mentioned, hey, if I get healthy the last game of the season, then that's when it's going to be. So, I'm not saying it won't be before that, but certainly it's sort of up in the air, and he's still got a ways to go to get healthy. He won't be doing anything probably the first couple weeks of camp. And now you got Banks over to DB, which was a move that I really like, because they need more depth there at corner, really any spot in the secondary. And he's a guy who can run, has some DB bloodlines with his dad at Mississippi State, and is a position that a lot of people thought he would play best in college. So, you got all those guys out there, then the newcomers you mentioned, and, Chavis Dawkins, sometimes you sort of, and it's not fair to him, you sort of forget he's on the team sometimes, despite the fact that he came in and played as a true freshman, as did Corey Banks and, Kill Pollard, tight end, some of those other guys. So it's a good problem to have for them, because they have some guys they can roll in there and feel good about. All the receivers they brought in as freshmen are good-looking kids, and they all bring something different to the table. So Shi Smith is the one that I'm very intrigued to see, because I think he could really help out on special teams too, and he's sort of like Debo in that he's a fast kid, but he's also tough in the open field. He's good with the ball in his hands. That's one reason he could translate well to a returner, because that's going to be an open competition. It's going to be a spot where, Muschamp and his staff, they're going to be looking for the guy who can take care of the ball and also make plays. And so, a lot of people just look at a guy and they say, okay, he's fast, he's quick, he can make some things happen, but it's also about ball security. How well does he catch the ball in front of 80,000 people with a bunch of big, fast guys bearing down on him? And if Shy, can do that, whether it's him or Fenton or Lamons or Jam Williams, any number of guys, I'm sure he's going to be in that conversation.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Is you got to catch the ball first, and that was an issue at times last year, clearly. And all those guys you mentioned have athletic ability. All those guys can make people miss, but like you said, you got to take care of the ball. If the defense, especially this day and age with so many good offenses out there, if your defense gets the ball back to your offense, you can't just give away possessions on punch. So I think. You look, I always think it's interesting, at the end of all of South Carolina's camps this summer, whenever there's kind of like a quick twitch guy that's probably a slot or a cornerback at the next level, they always shoot punts up in the air and make them try to catch it, So
right.
You're always kind of looking at that, and catching a punt is a completely different scenario than catching a thrown pass, and even than catching a kickoff. The kickoff, you're talking about end over end with nobody really close to you yet. Punt is spiraling funny, higher up in the air. All eyes are on you, and you got guys just barreling right down on you, like you said. So that'll be a key thing to watch. Let's sort of move it forward. I guess we've got Kurt Roper on Tuesday will be speaking. Then later in the week, we'll get to watch some more practices. After seeing one day, is there anything that you're going to specifically sort of try to watch next time we get out there? My thing is I'm wanting to see, hopefully we get a little 11-on-11. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I think next week or next time we get out there, my attention kind of goes to the offense. How are they rotating guys in there? I think we all know Deebo Samuel and, Brian Edwards are going to be two of the receivers on the field when they first go out there. Terry Guger listed as a starter at receiver, but like you said, all those guys behind him. And then the offensive line, we haven't even talked offensive line, and I think because we don't really get to look at them in the setting that we had on Monday, but that'll be something as camp goes on that I think will clearly be talked about a ton. Is going to be offensive line play.
Yeah, offensive line, defensive line. I mean, look, those are the biggest question marks. There are others. I mean, depth at linebacker, depth in the secondary, depth at quarterback. I mean, there are so many questions, and even with some of the more known commodities, USC still has to shore some things up. Special teams is another in terms of not just the other 10 guys out there, but the guy who's kicking it, the guy who's punting it, the guy who's snapping it. Those are all guys being replaced for USC. And we can look at it in practice and say, okay, this looks good, this looks bad. We won't know until there's a few games because, as you said, even with catching punts, for those guys, that's a lot different. I mean, Will Muschamp said Sunday, he said, look, we know Wozniak can do it. Alexander Wozniak, the place kicker for this season, said we know he's got the ability to do it, but we won't know. And, it's a lot different when you're kicking it in front of 80,000. You can't simulate that in practice. You can try. You can put him in some situations, heckle him and, play music, do whatever you can do. But it's a tough deal when there's pressure on you. That's the reason you felt good about Elliott Fry. He can go up there and he's not going to be nervous. He's going to hit it. And if he misses it, he just missed it. It's probably not because of nerves or anything like that. So those are all questions, but everybody is pointing towards that offensive line. I mean, because that was probably the most disappointing unit on the team last season. And the coaching staff and Jake Bentley and multiple offensive players, they've all pointed out, rightfully so, that it was not all on the offensive line. Their sack numbers were very high. Some of those were on the quarterback holding the ball too long. Some of them were because the offense was in a play in which they basically knew it wasn't going to work, and they had to, as Muschamp said, call it and haul it. And that's due to inexperience, not being able to change at the line, having a lot of green receivers, tight ends, and backs. And so now that they have more experience, those things won't happen as much, but they still have to play better in terms of just beating guys one-on-one. I'm not trying to make excuses for the performance last year because it was not good enough. And so talking to the players, Eric Wolford's put a lot of emphasis on the little things. They'll do things differently in terms of stance. They'll be in 3-point stance a lot more. Blocking in terms of the scheme, they'll have some similarities, but they'll teach it a little bit differently, in terms of technique. And so those are things, if they can stay healthy and get the right pieces in the right places and then have the added benefit of experience around, there's reason to think it could be better. I don't think it's going to turn around and be the best offensive line in the conference or in the top half or anything of that nature. But I certainly think it's fair to expect them to be better in some capacity.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's turn. We'll have at least the entire season probably to talk about offensive line play. I mean, I really think probably going into every single game, the discussion is going to be, can South Carolina block them?
Right.
And then can Carolina slow the run, or can Carolina get pressure on the quarterback? I can already tell you when we're talking about NC State in a few weeks with that great, NC State front defensively and an entire, offensive line coming back with NC State, we're going to be talking about those two things. So I think not only is that going to be a preseason thing, I think throughout the entire year, starting with that opener against NC State, that's going to be our focus. That's going to be something we have to talk about every single week. Recruiting, we got to get to Jonathan Gipson, new commitment for South Carolina on Monday afternoon. Not really a surprise, Chris. I think everybody who reads the site sort of knew that this was coming, probably been coming for a while, frankly. But a nice offer list for the kid. I think Tennessee, Ole Miss, Indiana were sort of the slate, the called finalists that, other than South Carolina, that were sort of in the mix. But a really nice offer list. Had an early offer from Auburn that I think was one of his other leaders. But for the most part, I think you look at the fact South Carolina's made the kid a priority. You look at the scheme fit. You look at what Carolina does with DBs, or more specifically what T-Rob and Muschamp do with DBs. And kind of just felt like some recruitments you shake your head, and other recruitments just sort of make sense. This one, I think, just sort of made sense on all sides. And this is a kid that, mid 3-star guy, but, you turn on the film, this guy, he'll knock your head off. So I think a solid pickup for South Carolina.
Yeah, definitely. He's someone that the staff has wanted for a long time, and I know fans are clamoring for some higher profile targets and, 4 stars and things like that, and they're in on some of those guys, and a lot of them happen to be deciding late. So there'll be more action on those at some point. But Gipson is a guy that the staff has targeted for a long time. I mean, since early in the year, later last year, ever since they saw him, they really liked his versatility. He actually played corner the last 2 years for Mill Creek, his high school in Georgia, and he's going to be playing safety this year, and that's where he projects in college. He's a big, 6'1", 6'2" kid. He's got range. He can run. As you said, Wes, very physical. He'll knock your block off. And so he's got that versatility to where he could really play any spot. But everybody thinks from his high school coach to South Carolina, they think that he's going to be a safety. And there are some reasons why he didn't gain as much traction on the recruiting trail that, we'll detail at some point along the process. And we're going to have an interview with his coach, Shannon Jarvis, Mill Creek, up on Gamecock Central soon for our subscribers. If you guys want to check that out after you listen to this podcast. But he's someone they really liked, and it's really been a situation where he's favored South Carolina for so long. Everybody could sort of see it coming. Just had to, go through the process and make sure, get through the summer, get preseason camp started off. They just kicked off camp the past couple days at Mill Creek, and his last visit to campus went extremely well, and it was pretty clear that was the direction it was heading.
And you know what? I thought he handled the process pretty well. Not a kid that does a ton of interviews, doesn't really seem to enjoy that part of things. But, just like you said, sort of knew he wanted to go to South Carolina, but he wanted to make sure. I think he sort of decided at the Spurs up day, but wanted to get back home, talk to his parents, and, basically said he's shutting it down. He's not gonna be taking any other visits, 100% to South Carolina. kind of has handled it, I thought, very, very well. So that's always sort of doesn't mean everything, but to me it's always a solid sign for a kid just how he handles the pressure of the recruiting process. So another commitment for the Gamecocks, this one coming in on Monday afternoon, and he actually informed his team this afternoon, I think right after their workout or right before their workout. So I'm sure that was a cool moment for him. We're sitting right at, I guess, 25 minutes, so let's wrap this thing up. Chris, any just closing thought or final thought to leave everybody with?
Yeah, something that's sort of been on my mind is that, we've gotten a lot of questions lately with folks wanting us to predict the season. How many wins should South Carolina fans expect? Wins and losses. First of all, it's really difficult to tell that. We haven't seen much of anything in practice. It's been talking season up until now. We still won't get a great grasp on it because, we don't get to go out there and watch practice every day, and all the other schools around the country are in preseason practice and have questions too. But I just think it's interesting that South Carolina, I think, is improving. I think will be a better team from top to bottom. There'll be some areas where they may not be as good as last year. For example, special teams with the actual kickers. There'll be some areas in which I think they'll be improved, and there are more of those than not. But the schedule's difficult, and when you look at, Tennessee will probably give South Carolina a better game than it did last year, and it'll be on the road. Georgia will be improved. Florida could be improved offensively, maybe take a step back defensively, but it'll still be a tough game. You just look at the roster, and there just aren't any gimmies. I mean, they have to play Wofford, who's projected to win their conference and is an option team. So this could be a much better team and not necessarily have more to show for it in the wins and losses column. But I'd say in general, there's still a lot of questions, and I think some of those will get answered in preseason. But the sort of fun thing to me, honestly, about this season is we're going to go into it with some unknowns in terms of following it, and that's actually sort of fun to see how it plays out.
Absolutely. We'll be talking about it, of course, all season long here on the GCR podcast and on GamecockCentral.com. I hope everyone that's not a subscriber will give that a try. Check us out on the Insiders Forum. We're always running some specials. I'm sure we'll have plenty of specials leading up to the season. So you'll want to check us out, GamecockCentral.com, and on the next GCR radio podcast. For Chris Clark, I'm Wes Mitchell. We'll see you next time.